HCI Lesson 10, Gestalt Principles of Design. And my source here is this web page or website, https://www.toptotal.com, Designers UI Gestalt Principles of Design. Introduction. The human brain is exceptionally good at filling in the blanks in an image and creating a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's why we see faces in things like tree leaves or sidewall cracks, etc. So here are some examples. So here, as if we can imagine some sort of a face, we have the nose, the eyes, and here we can imagine it as if there is a horse in a shape of a horse. And it's actually the perception of our human brain. So regardless of who first proposed the idea, there have been essays dating back as far as 1890. Gestalt principles are an important set of ideas for any designer to learn, and their implementation can greatly improve not just the aesthetics of design, but also its functionality and user-friendliness. In the simplest terms, Gestalt Theory is based on the idea that the human brain will attempt to simplify and organize complex images or designs that consist of main elements by subconsciously arranging the parts into an organized system that creates a whole, rather than just a series of disparate elements. Our brains are built to see structure and patterns in order for us to better understand the environment that we're living in. There are 6 individual principles commonly associated with Gestalt. I think I added here another, one more theory. So these are the similarity, continuation, closure, proximity, figureground, and symmetry and order, or also called pragnanz. I hope I pronounced that correctly. There are also some additional newer principles, sometimes associated with Gestalt, such as common fate. And I also have the common ground. Yes, I think it's called the common ground. So similarity. It's human nature to group like things together. In Gestalt, similar elements are visually grouped regardless of their proximity to each other. They can be grouped by color, shape, or size. Similarity can be used to tie together elements that might not be right next to each other in a design. So in this case, if we have this design, sometimes you could say that the green here can have similar functions. Or let's say, for example, if you enter the University of Luzon, for example, and you know that the uniform T-shirt, for example, of Comstad students is gray. Sometimes, if you see somebody wearing gray, and you will be automatically associating that student with the computer studies. So that's an example of similarity. Of course, you can make things dissimilar if you want to make them stand out from the crowd. It's why buttons for calls of action are often designed in a different color than the rest of a page, so they stand out and draw the visitor's attention to the desired action. In user experience design or UX design, using similarity makes it clear to your visitors which items are alike. For example, in a features list, using repetitive design elements such as an icon accompanied by 3 to 4 lines of text, the similarity principle will make it easy to scan through them. In contrast, changing the design elements for features you want to highlight makes them stand out and give them more importance to the visitor's perception. So that is how we can apply similarity. Okay, so we can either break that so that an item will stand out, or we can make them similar so that the familiarity will be there for the user. So designing with similarity in mind. So in links and navigation system are essential to allow users to view website contents and navigate between different pages. So while links are embedded inside the content, they must certainly be presented uniformly to allow users to identify linked text. So their presentation should be uniform so that if a user sees a link, or if it is a link, the user can easily identify that it is a link, because again, links in your design should have similar. So thus, text links should be different by color and usually shape as well. No matter how you do it, the important thing is that links should be clearly identified as much. So make them stand out. Make sure we'll typically consider a link to be any text that is blue and underlined. So that's how we usually typically consider it as a link. So in contents, how do we use similarity in contents? We can also use color, font, size, and type, highlighting, etc. to distinguish between and mark the types of content before user reads them. So for example, quotes that appear in boxes in a slightly bigger font with an italic emphasis are easily recognizable as such. If you still remember, in Bootstrap, these are the Jumbotron. So since it is quite different from the rest, so you break the similarity, then you are now giving emphasis to the particular element. The law of similarity carries our recognition of this standard from one website to another. Each site may use a variant on this theme, but overall the pattern is incredibly similar. So breaking the law of similarity can also help draw a user's attention. So just like what I've said a while ago. So user's attention to a specific piece of content, such as a call to action. That's right. We can make use of both sides of the line or border the law makes. The user's eye is a remarkably easy tool to manipulate. You just need to figure out what parts of your design you want to bring out or tie together. Headers. So website header play another essential role in organizing and building well-structured content for search engine crawling and for the reader. We normally place headers above content in a different font, color, size, etc. from the body of the content. They assist the reader in finding the relevant points in content and help control the overflow of the word. They are great milestones, and using them wisely, which isn't hard, will keep your users on your page. Remember that a user's eye will activate the brain to work to interpret your design in a certain way. Nothing is more tiring than a solid block of text on a page with no discernible features to draw the reader's eye. If you're near an old literary classic, why not open it and look at a spread of pages? So let's now take a look at the next law, the continuation or the law of continuity. So the law of continuity suggests that the human eye will follow the smoothest path when viewing lines, regardless of how the lines were actually drawn. So although this is how the lines were drawn, but sometimes we could see this path or this straight path here because of the law of continuity. Sometimes that is what our brain perceives that this is a straight line here and we have a curved line here, and that's the law of continuity. So this continuation can be a valuable tool when the goal is to guide a visitor's eye in a certain direction. They will follow the simplest path on the page, so make sure that the most vital parts they should see fall within that path. Since the eye naturally follows a line, placing items in a series in a line will naturally draw the eye from one item to the next. Horizontal sliders are one such example, as are related product listings on sites like Amazon. So here's an example of also the law following the law of continuity. So this is actually in MS Word. So this is MS Word mailing ribbon. As you can see, this follows the law of continuity in the sense that you usually do first is at the left of the menu. Then of course the next group might be the next step. So this is the next step, etc. So this is now a series of the steps that you do with mail merging, and it will be from left. So the perception is this will be from left to right, and that of course is following the law of continuity. Here's another example, the Google Map. So the Google Maps have become a necessity for an individual who has shifted to a new city or for the ones who like to travel. Google Maps also follow the rule of continuity. When we set a destination on the Google Map, it shows us the pathway from the starting point to the destination. We follow that pathway to reach our destination. So next is closure. Closure is one of the coolest Gestalt principles, and one I already touched at the beginning of this piece. It's the idea that your brain will fill in the missing parts of a design or image to create a whole. In its simplest form, the principle of closure allows your eye to follow something like a dotted line to its end. But more complex applications are often seen in logos, like that of the World Wildlife Fund. So large chunks of the outline for the panda are missing, but your brain has no problem filling in the missing sections to see the whole animal. So you notice there are no lines here, but still we can see the panda as a whole. So the closure is automatically given by our brain. Another very important example of closure at work in UX and UI design is when you show a partial image fading off the user's screen in order to show them that there is more to be found if they swipe left or right. Without a partial image, if only full images are shown, the brain doesn't immediately interpret that there might be more to be seen, and therefore your user is less likely to scroll since closure is already apparent. So here's another example. So this is an example of Bootstrap for carousel. So without this, then the brain will interpret this as a closure, meaning that this is already complete. So what do? We place this one so that it indicates that this is not only a single image. So we're trying to break the closure example, or we're going the law of closure. Again, all alone, without these buttons here and this indicator, our brain will tell us that this is only a single image. But with this, then we know that we can scroll left and right. Then the next Gestalt principle is proximity. Proximity refers to how close elements are to one another. The strongest proximity relationships are those between overlapping subjects. But just grouping objects into a single area can also have a strong proximity effect. The opposite is also true, of course. By putting space between elements, you can add separation even when their other characteristics are the same. So take this group of circles for example. So here we can say that all of these are groups, but if we separate them, we can say that this is a group, this is another group, and this is another group because of their proximity. So here is actually an example, actually a bad example of a design, and that's why we should take note of proximity. Okay, so in this case, we notice that in this example, the proximity gestalt is impairing UX due to the field labels being closer, so the field closer to the fields under them. So the field labels are closer to the field under them. Okay, and people would mistakenly believe that where the information goes for C and D, yet the information is supposed to be provided in the fields above the text label. So here, so you might be interpreting that this one should be placed here and this one should be placed here. Okay, but it says here that it should be above or whatever. So because of the proximity. Then we also have Figureground. The Figureground principle is similar to the closure principle in that it takes advantage of the way the brain processes negative space. You've probably seen examples of this principle floating around in memes on social media as a part of logo, like the FedEx logo or your logo. Your brain will distinguish between the object it considers to be in the foreground of an image, so the figure or the focal point, and the background area on which the figure rests. So where things get interesting is when the foreground and background actually contain two distinct images like this. So here, if you consider the black as your foreground, it's actually a tree and we have birds here. But if we use white as your foreground, you can see here two animals. I think I have an ape and a lion or a tiger. So here is an example also of Figureground. So if you consider this as your figure, then you have the shape of a man or Peter. If you consider this, then you have a wolf. If you consider the white, it's like a base, but this one are as if you have two persons facing each other. So both for these images. So in general terms, your brain will interpret the larger area of an image as the ground and the smaller as the figure. As shown in the image above, though you can see the lighter and darker colors can influence what is viewed as a figure and what is viewed as a ground. The Figureground principle can be very handy when product designers want to highlight a focal point, particularly when it is active or in use. For example, when a Modal window pops up and the rest of the site fades into background, or when a search bar is clicked on the contrast and the contrast is increased between it and the rest of the site. So just in this example, so here's a model form. So once you open a model form, it will gray this background. So that will immediately, the user will immediately know what is the figure and what is the ground. Because if not, then the user will be confused. There are two main factors that affect the way we perceive the figure and ground in any design. The size of the figure when compared to the background. For example, header text. So header text is normally published in a larger font than body text. In this instance, the header is the figure and the body the ground. The header stands out more to the eye than the main body of text. So you have to take note of that. The contrast between the figure and the ground. This is why most printed pages We'll use black ink on a white background, and the figure, the text is at maximum contrast with the ground, the page. Contrast provides a distinct barrier between the two. This is why the readability of content can be impaired when there is little contrast between the text and the page. It becomes more difficult for us to distinguish the figure from the ground. Have you ever wondered why you never find red text on a blue or gray screen? So the contrast is quite not good. That's why it's actually a no-no to have a red text on blue or gray screen. So the contrast is the reason for that. The relationships between figure and ground can be classified into three categories. So we have the stable. In the case of the stable figure, the figure will be clearly identifiable from the background, and one element clearly dominates the overall layout. So in most cases for user interface design, I think it can be more on stable. Reversible, in this case, the figure and the background have near equal density. This enables the eye to flip the figure with the background, hence reversible. This can be used to create visual illusions in both web design and art. However, at any point in time, a reversible design will have a clear figure and a clear ground. Ambiguous. In an ambiguous design, there is a little distinction between the ground and the figure, and at any point, a single element might be both figure and ground at the same time. You can make your design ambiguous by blurring the boundaries between your ground and figure. It sounds difficult, but it's fascinating realm to explore, and there are many famous examples of ambiguous design. So by M.C. Escher, a Dutch graphics artist who was a master of this. His design tapped ambiguity to the maximum, and thanks to that, we have wonderful pictures of people climbing steps in buildings. Some are going up, and some are going down, but at impossible angles. Escher used ambiguity to make waterfalls flow around more buildings in an impossible way. The water initially flows downward, falling in places, follows a seemingly logical course, and then mysteriously flows up again. Ambiguous designs are yours for the taking of your inspiration, whether you want to insert hidden writing faces in profile that are also a single different face or faces made of fruity parts. Designing with the figure ground in mind. In the image on the right, the digital camera world website menu uses the figure ground principle to differentiate between two menus. See the top section of the image. So notice here we have here two menus. So the use of drop shadow and color creates the illusion of the lower blue menu being on a top layer. So there's a shadow here, while the white menu remains part of the background. You can also see figure and ground at work on the 500px.com website homepage, which is this one. The background is a large and dominant image, the vista of a lake in a majestic mountain wilderness, but the content is clearly identifiable thanks to the use of both space and contrast with the background. So this text. This stops the background from overwhelming the content and distracting or confusing a visitor who is probably joining in with the couple to take in the view. Cleverly bull's-eyed in the lake and tapering up between the mountain is a text, the all-important message. So this is the message. You also have symmetry and order. The law of symmetry and order is also known as pragnanz, the German word for good figure. What this principle says is that your brain will perceive ambiguous shapes in a simple manner as possible. For example, a monochrome version of the Olympic logo is seen as a series of overlapping circles. So our brains will tell us that these are overlapping circles rather than a collection of curved lines. Let's say, for example, that this is one line, another 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 line, so etc. As if these are several curved lines collected together. So just like in this case, if we see this, our brain, although this maybe is a single shape, our brain will tell us that maybe this is a triangle, this one is a circle, and this one is a rectangle. So that is how our brain will interpret that. And that is what we call symmetry and order. So designing with symmetry and order in mind. Designing with the law of pragnanz in mind, we can use the law of pragnanz to help when wireframing a website. Our eyes assemble the content blocks into a single page, and this law goes by the other name of the law of good gestalt. And for good reason. We humans like to make quick sense of things that would otherwise be upsettingly disordered. We dislike flux and need to find meaning quickly. Luckily, we don't even have to think about doing this. Our eyes have already got there. When redesigning a site, you can apply pragnanz law to wireframe the new concept and place it alongside the current version of a page. The eye can swiftly pick out any variances, and the user can quickly provide feedback on changes made without the need for content. That's all there is to it. So here's an example of a web page so that you can wireframe that, or before you design this, maybe you started with a wireframe, and as if we have here several rectangles. Common faith. While common faith was not originally included in Gestalt Theory, it has since been added. In UX design, its usefulness can be overlooked. This principle states that people will group together things that point to or are moving in the same direction. In nature, we see this in things like flocks of birds or school of fish, and they are made up of a bunch of individual elements. But because they move seemingly as one, our brains group them together and consider them as a single stimulus. So designing with the law of common faith in ground. The law of common faith plays an important role in design. For example, the nested menus and content. Take example of the Linkin as shown in the image. The Linkin have used the law of common faith to build relationship between submenus. When you move over a menu item, the submenu item moves at the same direction as the last. This creates a link between submenus in the minds of the users. Law of unified connectedness. The law of unified connectedness states that elements that are connected to each other using colors, lines, frames, or other shapes are perceived as a single unit when compared with other elements that are not linked in the same manner. This grouping effect works even when it contradicts other Gestalt principles such as proximity and similarity. How can it contradict laws, you might ask? Well, remember that we're dealing with a unique combination of the human eye and brain. Without getting into the subject of magic, illusions, or tricks, because we don't want to get off topic, we can see that the human tendency to link or group elements or focus them on like items in the sea of dissimilar objects is a powerful trait. So implementing this connectedness in your design is easy. There are many ways to indicate grouping within a design. Some common examples include connecting related links or buttons by adding them to the same drop-down menu. So if they belong to the same drop-down menu, we can say that these are related. Using the same bullet shapes, colors, or numbering systems such as Roman numerals, Arabic numbers, etc., on list items to group them with each other. Displaying functions of a similar nature such as login design, so that they are related inside a frame or colored rectangle. So here, you notice here that there are also frames here. So meaning that all inside a single frame should be similar. So this is the case here, because if you go to look at this, these are all about formatting text. And this frame here is about formatting paragraph, etc. So the law of unified connectedness, or I believe this is also the law of common region. So if we group this, then although they are similar, but this is group, then we could say that maybe these are similar rather than the whole circles. So that ends my lecture. Thank you very much.